Welcome. Take a moment to be still. Listen not with the mind, but with the presence behind the mind. Feel the aliveness that surrounds you. That is the present moment. That is what is real. We have been conditioned to believe that our thoughts are who we are. But the truth is far simpler and far more profound. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears it. And this awareness is timeless. Thought is a tool, one of great value, but also great danger when it becomes your master. The mind is always either pulling you into the past or projecting you into the future, regret, worry, planning, remembering. But have you noticed that neither past nor future actually exist right now? What is real, what has always been real, is this moment. The now is not a place in time. It is the only point where life truly unfolds. When you surrender to this moment fully, you awaken, not as a concept, not as a spiritual theory, but as a lived reality. When the thinking mind quiets, even for a brief moment, you taste peace, not because something new has arrived, but because the noise has faded and what was always there is revealed. That silence is the essence of who you are. Awakening is not a future goal. It is not something to be achieved one day when you have meditated long enough or studied deeply enough. It is something that unfolds in you the very moment you become aware of the present. It begins now. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the breath move through your body. Notice the stillness underneath the rhythm of your breathing. That stillness is not empty. It is alive, it is awareness, and it is you. From this stillness, a new kind of seeing arises. You no longer need to cling to thoughts. You don't need to resist them either. You simply observe, you allow them to come, and you allow them to go. This is freedom. As you begin to reside more and more in the now, life begins to open. It becomes simpler, clearer. You experience a joy that is not caused by anything outside you, a peace that is not dependent on circumstances. It just is. You are not your thoughts, you are the awareness behind them. This statement is not a philosophical idea to be debated in the mind. It is a direct pointer to your essential nature. Most people spend their entire lives trapped in a stream of thought, believing that the voice in their head is who they are. From the moment they wake up, the mind begins narrating, judging, analyzing, projecting. This voice is often anxious, reactive, or lost in stories about the past and future. It creates an identity made up of memories, opinions, roles, and experiences. But if you pause and observe closely, you will notice something profoundly liberating. There is a space between you and the thoughts you are having. This space is not empty, it is full of awareness. It is the silent observer that sees the thoughts come and go. You can recognize this when you notice that you are aware of a thought. If you were the thought, you would not be able to see it. The very act of witnessing a thought proves that you are not the thought itself, but the consciousness in which the thought appears. Just as the sky is not affected by the clouds passing through it, your true self is not touched by the mental chatter that arises and fades. People tend to over-identify with their minds because they have never learned to rest in awareness. From childhood, we are taught to think, solve, plan, achieve. Rarely are we taught how to be still, how to observe the inner space without judgment. This leads to a constant stream of unconscious thinking, which shapes our emotions, our behavior, and our sense of self. When you believe every thought that arises, you become a prisoner of mental form. You begin to act not from presence, but from conditioning. You react instead of responding. You live not in the present moment, but in a narrative created by the mind. When you realize that you are the awareness behind thought, a shift begins to happen. There is a deep inner stillness that starts to emerge. You begin to disidentify from the stories in your head. Thoughts may still arise, some helpful, some repetitive, some painful, but they lose their power over you. You are no longer swept away by them. Instead, you watch them as you would watch clouds pass across the sky or leaves float down a river. They come, they go, but you remain. This realization is not an escape from thought. It is a transformation in how you relate to thought. You begin to use the mind as a tool rather than being used by it. Just as you would pick up a hammer when needed and put it down when done, so too can you use thinking when it serves a purpose and return to presence when it does not. This is the beginning of inner freedom. It is important to notice that this awareness is always present, always available. It is not something you have to create. You don't need to earn it or understand it intellectually. In fact, the more you try to grasp it with the mind, the further you move from it. Awareness is what remains when you stop trying. It is the quiet background of your experience, the space in which all sounds, sensations, emotions, and thoughts arise and dissolve. You can experience this directly at any moment. Simply take a breath and become aware of it. Notice the sensation of air entering your body. Become aware of your surroundings, the sensations in your hands, the feeling of the ground beneath you. As you do this, notice that there is a silent presence observing everything. That presence is not thinking. It is simply aware. That is who you are, beneath all roles, labels, and identities. The mind may resist this truth. It will try to argue, analyze, or distract. That is what the mind does. But you are not the resistance. You are not the argument. You are the one who sees it all. This seeing is effortless. You don't need to change your thoughts, fix them, or make them go away. You only need to recognize that you are not them. In this recognition, you come home to yourself, not as an idea or belief, but as direct experience. The more you rest in this awareness, the more clarity and peace arise. Life begins to unfold not from mental noise, but from presence. You begin to see with new eyes, hear with new ears, live from a deeper place that is untouched by the surface level fluctuations of the mind. The present moment is the only true reality. Everything else is a mental construct. The past is a collection of memories, some clear, some distorted, that exist only in thought. The future is an imagined projection that hasn't happened yet. Yet, we spend most of our lives lost in these two non-existent realms. We revisit conversations, replay mistakes, fantasize about success, worry about outcomes. In doing so, we overlook the only place where life is actually happening, here and now. The present moment is not something you can capture with the mind. It's not a point in time that can be held or measured. It is the open field in which everything arises: sounds, sensations, sights, feelings. It is where the breath is felt, where the heart beats, where the body sits. Right now, in this moment, is where your life is unfolding. There is no other place, and there never has been. What you call your past was experienced in a previous now. What you will one day call the future will also be experienced in a now. The now is eternal in that sense. It's the only constant. Most people overlook this because the mind constantly creates a veil of distraction. It prefers movement, mental activity, stories. There's a compulsion to dwell on what was or what could be. But beneath that restlessness is a profound stillness that can only be accessed when attention is fully brought into the present. The moment you give your full awareness to what is happening now, without judgment, without labeling, without needing it to be different, you touch something deeper than thought. You experience reality directly. This direct experience is different from thinking about experience. When you are fully present, you are not interpreting reality through the lens of thought. You are simply being. You are tasting the richness of life without the filter of commentary. The sound of birds, the feel of wind on your skin, the rhythm of your breath, all these become vibrant and alive when attention is not scattered but centered in the now. Being present does not mean withdrawing from life. In fact, it is the opposite. It means becoming fully available to it. When you are rooted in the now, you listen more deeply, speak more clearly, move more intentionally. You begin to act from a place of inner stillness rather than reactive noise. Problems seem smaller, situations more manageable, because your attention is not divided between the present and some imagined scenario in your head. The now is also the space in which healing occurs. Emotional pain is often a residue from the past unprocessed experiences, old wounds, unresolved feelings. When attention is brought fully into the present moment, space opens for these energies to surface and dissolve. The present moment doesn't judge, it simply allows, and in that allowing, transformation happens naturally. Many people confuse being present with doing nothing, as if it is a passive state, but presence is deeply active even when the body is still. It is full of intelligence and energy. In presence, you are deeply connected to life, and life begins to flow through you with greater ease. Creativity awakens, insight arises, solutions appear, not because you force them, but because the mind is no longer clouded by past and future distraction. Living in the now also brings a natural sense of gratitude. When you stop looking for fulfillment in some distant future and stop lamenting what is behind you, you begin to notice what is already here. The small details of life, the warmth of sunlight, the silence between sounds, the kindness in a stranger's eyes, these become deeply appreciated. Gratitude doesn't need to be manufactured. It arises naturally when attention returns to the fullness of now. Even in challenging moments, the present holds power. It offers a stable ground beneath the shifting waves of emotion and circumstance. When fear arises, it is often about a future that hasn't happened. When guilt arises, it is about a past that cannot be changed. But the now is untouched by these shadows. In the now, you can breathe, you can feel, you can simply be. And from this place, even the most difficult experiences can be met with clarity and compassion. The mind will try to pull you away. It will insist that something is missing from this moment, that you need to think your way to peace. But peace is not found through thought, it is found through presence. Every time you bring your awareness back to what is here, you break the cycle of mental noise. You return to reality, not as an idea, but as a living experience. Awakening begins with stillness and presence. It does not arise through accumulation of knowledge or effort of will. It begins the moment the constant inner noise subsides, even briefly, and a quiet awareness begins to shine through. In the background of every experience, there is a silent field of consciousness. Most people remain unaware of this field because their attention is entirely consumed by thoughts, emotions, and external events. Yet, underneath all this activity, there is a presence that never changes, never reacts, never judges. That presence is stillness. Stillness is not the absence of movement in the external world. It is an inner condition where there is no resistance to what is. It is a space where the mind ceases its habitual commentary and something deeper is felt. In this stillness, there is no effort to become anything, no striving to achieve. There is simply being. In that state of being, something profound becomes available. a direct glimpse of reality without the filter of thought. Presence is what connects you to this stillness. Presence is attention resting fully in the now, without drifting into memory or imagination. It is the felt sense of aliveness that exists beneath every experience, whether pleasant or unpleasant. It is not a passive watching, but a deeply alert state where you are no longer caught up in the momentum of thinking. You begin to see things as they are, not as your mind interprets them. The colors seem brighter, the sounds clearer, the sensations more vivid. Everything becomes more real. This shift into presence does not require a specific environment or spiritual setting. It can happen while sitting in silence, walking through nature, or even in the midst of everyday activity. The key is where your attention is placed. When attention is turned inward, away from the noise of thought and into the felt experience of this moment, stillness begins to emerge. That stillness is not something you create. It is revealed the moment the noise subsides. Awakening is not a future event. It is not a goal to strive for. It is a recognition that what you are seeking is already here, underneath the surface agitation of the mind. When you become present, even for a moment, you begin to notice that this stillness is not empty. It is full of clarity, peace, and quiet joy. It is deeply alive. It is spacious and unconfined. And in this space, you begin to sense a deeper intelligence that guides life naturally, without effort. Most people miss this because they are identified with their thoughts. The constant mental activity creates a veil, hiding the stillness that is always present. They live in a state of inner resistance, resisting what is, trying to fix the past, control the future, or escape the discomfort of now. But stillness cannot arise through resistance. It only emerges through acceptance. When you fully allow the present moment to be as it is, without trying to manipulate it, you enter the doorway to awakening. Presence brings with it a sense of inner spaciousness. Even in the middle of chaos, something within remains untouched. You begin to see that circumstances come and go, emotions rise and fall, thoughts appear and disappear, but there is a deeper part of you that is always still. That is the foundation of awakening. It is not about changing your life situation, but about changing the place from which you experience life. The outer may remain the same, but the inner transforms completely. In presence, even pain and discomfort are met without resistance. They may still arise, but they are no longer magnified by mental commentary. They are experienced as sensations, not as identity. This simple shift creates room for natural healing. When you do not fight the present moment, it reveals its gifts. Stillness shows you that peace is not dependent on external conditions. It is your natural state when the mind is quiet. As presence deepens, the sense of a separate self begins to dissolve. You no longer feel like a fragment fighting against the world. You begin to sense your unity with all life. The boundaries soften. The inner and outer merge into one seamless flow. This is not something you understand with the mind. It is something you feel directly. It cannot be put into words, but it can be known deeply, intimately. Stillness and presence are not separate from you. They are what remain when you stop identifying with thought. They are always here, beneath every experience, waiting to be noticed. When you rest in them, even briefly, the illusion of separation begins to fade. What remains is peace, clarity, and the gentle unfolding of awakening from within. Thought is a tool, not your identity. It is a powerful instrument designed for specific functions, solving problems, planning, analyzing, recalling useful information. But it was never meant to define who you are. The issue begins when thought moves from being a servant to becoming the master. This shift happens gradually, often unnoticed. and becomes so deeply ingrained that people begin to live entirely through the lens of the thinking mind. They begin to believe that they are what they think, that their value is determined by the content of their thoughts, and that their identity is shaped solely by mental stories and concepts. This over-identification with thought is the root of much human suffering. When every thought is believed, taken as truth, and woven into the fabric of identity, then the fluctuations of the mind become the fluctuations of self, worth, and peace. A negative thought becomes not just a passing mental formation, but a statement of who you are. A fearful projection about the future becomes a source of anxiety and tension. A memory of the past becomes a burden that continues to weigh on the present. In this state, the mind becomes a loop of commentary, always interpreting, judging, comparing, strategizing. Life is no longer lived directly but mediated through a thick filter of mental interpretation. Recognizing that thought is merely a tool begins to shift this pattern. When you see that thought is something that arises and passes within awareness, you also begin to see that you are not the one who thinks, you are the one who observes thinking. Just as you can hear a sound or feel a sensation in the body, you can notice a thought appearing in the mind. This simple recognition begins to create space between you and the thinking process, and in that space, freedom is found. The thinking mind is incredibly useful when it is applied with conscious awareness. It can build structures, compose music, create art, write books, and explore scientific questions. It can reflect on choices and navigate the practical aspects of life. But it has its limits, and when those limits are not honored, thought becomes dysfunctional. It begins to loop, to overanalyze, to fixate. It creates problems that don't exist. It clings to the past or resists the present. It tries to control the uncontrollable. When thought is used as a tool, you pick it up when needed and set it down when it no longer serves a purpose. You become aware of when thinking is helpful and when it is simply repeating patterns. You learn to distinguish between functional thought and compulsive thought. Functional thought is clear, focused, and purposeful. Compulsive thought is repetitive, unconscious, and usually laced with fear or judgment. One arises from presence, the other from ego. The ego is essentially a mental construct, a collection of thoughts, beliefs, and labels that the mind uses to create a sense of self. It is sustained through constant thinking. The ego cannot survive in stillness because stillness exposes its illusory nature. When you become still and present, the thoughts that create the egoic identity begin to fade. What remains is awareness itself, spacious, silent, without form. Thought can describe experience, but it can never be experience. It can speak about love, but it cannot feel love. It can define beauty, but it cannot perceive it directly. It can remember joy, but it cannot generate the feeling of joy in the present moment. When thought is mistaken for reality, the mind becomes the dominant lens through which life is lived, and the richness of direct experience is lost. The world is no longer seen as it is, but as thought says it is. Stepping back from thought does not mean rejecting it. It means using it wisely, understanding its purpose, and recognizing its limitations. It means seeing that beneath every thought is a silent awareness that does not need to explain or define anything. That awareness is always here, watching, noticing, being. It does not cling to thoughts, nor does it push them away. It allows them to come and go, like waves on the surface of an ocean that remains untouched at its depths. When thought is returned to its rightful place as a tool, life becomes simpler, the mind becomes quieter. You begin to listen more deeply, not just to others, but to the present moment itself. You move through life with less inner conflict, because you are no longer arguing with what is. You no longer seek identity in thought, and so the need to defend or prove yourself fades. You live not through mental noise, but through the still clarity of presence. True peace arises when you stop resisting the now. Resistance is the inner tension that arises when the mind says, "This moment should be different from what it is." It is subtle at times and loud at others, but it is nearly always present in the background when suffering exists. The moment something is not how the mind thinks it should be, whether it's a sound, a person's behavior, a feeling in the body, or a situation in life, resistance begins. It takes many forms: irritation, frustration, anger, impatience, anxiety, despair. All of these are variations of the same underlying condition, non-acceptance of what is. The now is not something distant or abstract. It is the only place life ever unfolds. Every breath, every step, every thought and emotion arises in this single eternal moment. Yet the mind rarely wants to rest here. It either projects into a future it imagines will be better, or it clings to a past it wishes were different. This rejection of the present moment is the root of inner conflict. The mind says this should not be happening, and in that statement a war begins, not with the world, but with reality itself. Peace begins the moment that war ends. When you stop arguing with the now, you discover that the moment itself was never the problem. It was the mental resistance to it, the story about it, the refusal to allow it, that created suffering. Something remarkable happens when you allow the present moment to be exactly as it is, even if it is uncomfortable. There is an opening, a softening, an inner spaciousness that makes room for peace, not the peace of external perfection, but the peace that comes from surrendering to what is. Surrender does not mean giving up. It is not apathy or passivity. It is the courageous act of aligning yourself with reality, of saying yes to this moment, even if it contains pain or uncertainty. It is recognizing that life is always happening now, and that your inner state does not have to be dependent on external conditions. In that surrender, you become deeply rooted in presence. The mind no longer dominates, and in its absence, peace arises naturally, not as something you chase, but as something that reveals itself when resistance dissolves. The now is complete as it is. It does not require your approval or disapproval. It does not need your judgment. It only asks to be seen. The moment you bring full attention to this moment without trying to change it, you step out of the stream of compulsive thinking. You enter a different dimension, not of time, but of being. This is the stillness that exists beneath all experience, the peace that was always there but hidden beneath layers of mental noise. When resistance stops, even for a moment, a deep clarity arises. You begin to see things as they are, not as you want them to be or fear them to be. You begin to respond to life rather than react from conditioned patterns. There is intelligence in this space, an intelligence that does not come from thought, but from awareness itself. From this awareness, your actions become aligned, spontaneous, and peaceful. Even painful emotions, when fully allowed in the now, begin to lose their grip. Sadness, anger, fear, these do not intensify through acceptance. They transform. What fuels them is not the emotion itself, but the story the mind attaches to it, the resistance to feeling it, the attempt to escape it. When you allow the emotion to simply be, without labeling or judging it, it passes through you like a wave. What remains is a deeper sense of space and presence. You discover that peace is not the absence of emotion, but the space in which all emotions are held. This is the essence of living without resistance, allowing each moment to be what it is, not needing to mentally interfere with it. You become less entangled in the endless push and pull of wanting and not wanting. Life becomes simpler, not because external events change, but because your relationship with the present changes. You stop carrying the weight of judgment and control, and in their place arises a gentle openness, a willingness to meet life as it is. Peace does not arrive someday in the future when everything is finally right. It is here, now, beneath the surface of thought, waiting to be uncovered. The invitation is always present to let go of the inner fight, to soften into the now, to trust in the unfolding of each moment without resistance. In that space, what emerges is not dullness or passivity, but a vibrant stillness that allows you to live fully from the depth of being rather than from the surface of mind. From presence, authentic action naturally flows. When you are fully present, rooted in awareness rather than distracted by thought, your actions are no longer driven by fear, ego, or the need to prove something. They arise from a place of clarity and inner stillness. This kind of action does not come from mental calculation, but from an intuitive knowing that emerges in the absence of internal noise. There is no pressure, no rush, no seeking, just a quiet readiness to respond to life as it unfolds. Authentic action is not reactive. Reaction comes from the past, from conditioned patterns, emotional baggage, unresolved pain. It is a knee-jerk movement that arises before awareness can enter. In contrast, when you are present, there is a gap between stimulus and response. In that gap, you have access to wisdom that is not personal but universal. It is not based on memory or desire, but on alignment with the deeper flow of life. You say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done without force or resistance. In presence, the need to control outcomes falls away. The mind, when left unchecked, is always seeking a particular result. It constantly strategizes, manipulates, projects into the future. But presence does not operate from outcome-oriented thinking. It responds to what is, not what should be. When you act from presence, you trust the moment itself to guide you. Even if the path ahead is not clear, there is a quiet confidence that the next step will reveal itself at the right time. This way of acting is deeply creative. Creativity flourishes in stillness, not in mental strain. When the mind quiets, space opens for something fresh to move through you, something not born of the past, not recycled from old patterns, but original and alive. Whether it is in art, conversation, decision, making, or the simple tasks of daily life, presence brings a quality of depth and sincerity that cannot be faked. Others feel it. They sense the difference between someone who is acting from ego and someone who is moving from a deeper inner alignment. Presence removes the heaviness from action. Often, action is burdened by internal narratives. I must succeed. I have to prove myself. I need to get it right. These thoughts create tension, hesitation, and fear of failure. But when those thoughts are not in control, action becomes light, graceful, and fluid. You are no longer trying to become something or get somewhere. You are simply doing what the moment asks of you, fully and without resistance. There is also a great intelligence in action that arises from presence. It adapts to changing circumstances without losing connection to the inner stillness. It does not cling to fixed plans or rigid ideas. It listens, it observes, it moves in harmony with the unfolding of life. This does not mean that you become passive or indecisive. On the contrary, your decisions become clearer and more direct, because they are not clouded by inner conflict or fear. You do not act to avoid discomfort or to seek validation, but because the action itself feels true in the moment. In this state, even the smallest acts take on significance: making tea, washing dishes, walking down the street. These ordinary activities become expressions of presence. They are done with care, attention, and openness. There is no need to rush through them to get to something more important. The doing itself becomes meaningful because it is infused with awareness. This is how life becomes sacred, not through grand achievements, but through full engagement with each moment. When action flows from presence, it is sustainable. You do not burn out because you are not operating from strain or inner pressure. You are not constantly trying to maintain an image or keep up with an idea of success. You are simply living in alignment with life itself. Energy is not wasted in inner resistance or mental struggle. It is directed clearly, effortlessly, and purposefully. This way of living brings a deep sense of fulfillment, not because every moment is easy or every outcome is favorable, but because there is no longer a gap between who you are and how you live. There is a sense of wholeness, of integrity, of inner and outer alignment. You are no longer split between thought and reality, between fear and truth. You are simply here, and from that here-ness, action arises, not to escape the moment, but to serve it. Even in challenging situations, presence allows you to stay centered. You face difficulties with openness rather than resistance. You listen before you speak, you pause before you act, and when you do move, your movement carries the weight and depth of stillness within it. This is the power of presence, not in the absence of action, but in the authenticity and clarity of the action that flows from it. So, as awareness deepens, and as thought returns to its rightful place, something timeless reveals itself. Not through effort, not through seeking, but through simple presence. There is nothing to add, nothing to remove. Just this moment, complete, alive, free from the burden of past and future. Let the silence within guide you. Let the now become your home, and in that stillness discover that you are not separate from life. You are life, unfolding in its purest form.